Hi, everyone. Welcome. So here we go. Welcome, everyone, Special Education Tech Center. My name is Sharon Redman. We're here tonight to talk about how we put assistive technology and AAC into the IEP. So really looking at strength-based IEPs and what that even means, and then how can we write that and really collaborate and come together as a team. So, again, my name is Sharon Redman, and I am an assistive technology specialist, but I started off as a special education teacher. I've done preschool, um, elementary, middle school, some high school, transition work, and currently, right now, I'm a PhD candidate at Penn State University in the special education program, and also have a fellowship in for the AAC leadership grant that is here. Most of my background has been in special education. I took a few years out of special education when I taught overseas in overseas schools, where I taught kindergarten. So that is me in a nutshell. So we're going to just get going. So our learning objectives tonight, when we're talking about some strength-based IEPs, and we're going to go through this information super fast. And I don't want it to be fast, but we only have an hour together. It's packed full and lots of things for you to explore. And we are going to you should be getting that the presentation in the chat so that you have access to that and can take a look later on your own time and explore some of the links and some of the things that I have in there that I've linked for you. But tonight we're really going to focus on that, like understanding kind of that history of a deficit-based IEP, like how did we get here, right? And how do we then move towards that more strength-based approach? And by the end, I'm hoping you can describe at least how and where we can write, that AT and AAC into the IEP and what that looks like, and then be able to state those areas so that we can build off of as it kind of builds. You'll see how writing assistive technology, including AAC, builds off of each other as we go through that. And as you build the IEP. And it's really going to be a lot about collaborating and building these kind of wraparound IEPs for our students that have some pretty significant needs. So we're going to just jump in but before we do, actually, I now remember what I was going to ask you. And give you an opportunity. If you have questions, I'm not monitoring the chat, but Setsi is. So if you have a question, please feel free to throw that into the chat, and Ashani will then just kind of bump in and ask that. Or if you feel more comfortable and you want to turn on your camera, or you want to ask it, just turn your camera on, turn your microphone on, and we can have that conversation. So I'll leave some time at the end as well so that we can kind of go over some of these questions. And, I'm just so impressed that everybody is here, because writing IEPs is like the hardest part of our job. However, it's also the foundation of everything that we do. So, and I found that as being the special education teacher that, I was in charge of these IEPs that had an OT, a PT, speech, vision, outside agencies. And so being able to get everyone on board and to be able to kind of move this needle away from this deficit model to more of a strength-based and a collaborative model was really important. So I'm just going to share on how we can go about doing that. And as always, I'm always a learner. So if you have hot tips and you want to share some strategies that you've done and you have found have worked with this group, please let us know and please pop in, because I think that that's what we learn from each other, and it's such a valuable resource, all of you being here. So we're going to start with what is this model of disability and what does this have to do with strength-based IEPs? Well, I feel like we have to kind of go back and understand where they came from and why it's happening in the way they're doing, why they are the way they are, right? Why are the IEPs one, so difficult to write, and why are they it feels like they're so, and they are this deficit model. And it really comes back from this different models. There's multiple models of disability, and that really is how we are viewing the area of disability, right? And so our perception and view of what that of disability really formulates how we go about writing our IEPs, how we go about as a therapist, and within our community. And so in the 70s when PL 94-142 came around, it was really based on this medical model of disability, right? Where that problem lies within the learner. And so with that, then you have that deficit terminology and deficit model, right? And so we're always starting with, well, what is the problem? And then we move into, well, here's the solution, right? Here are the goals we're going to be working on. Here are the things we're going to fix. However, as we know better, we do better, right? And so now we're moving and we can move into this social model of disability where we're understanding that this problem doesn't lie within the learner, but the problem lies within the environment. And so as that, then we can start and move towards more of strength-based and terminology, right? And in the social model of disability, we really start hearing these words of ableism and looking at our biases. And I think that that's just a really great space to just kind of step in and think for a moment. Like when we're speaking of ableism, which is really that understanding or the usage. Boy, it's a really big term. We're not going to get into all of it. But in this context, really looking at, what is the ableist language that we use? Meaning, how are we using that language? Are we using it more of a deficit language, or are we moving more towards that social model and having that those terminologies and the words that we use not on the learner but really on that environment? And then looking at our biases, right? Looking at the different things that how we go about and we see our students as we see people with disabilities, and just taking a step back and just thinking about that and how we can how that has implications into our work. So we are all here, and we are all here to do great work. And but I think at times it's nice to know that at least when we're looking at these IEPs and how they've been created, that that it is not on us. This is something that has been was created quite a long time ago. So really looking at this law, we're not going to spend a lot of time here, but I mentioned like back in the 70s when PL 94-142, the EHA, which was the Education for All Handicapped Children's Act, came into effect, and that was that model. That really hasn't changed as we've gone through, but different pieces have each time that whether it's been reauthorized right here, and the last time was 2004, or there have been small changes enacted, such as the Assistive Technology Act in 98, and then there's been reiterations of that, that we get and we become better at moving that needle from that deficit language into more positive language. So we could take a whole class and do years of assistive technology law and disability law. And so, but that's not what we're here. My main point of showing you this is that it's really when we're looking again at the language that is in there and how the IEPs have been created, it really has stemmed from there. So what do we do with that, right? So we know now, right, that we want to be able to take a look at presuming that potential, right? Changing that perspective really helps us see things differently. So moving from that deficit language, taking a look at the IEP, taking a look at some of the IEP goals that we've written. I have written some doozies, some real bad IEP goals, right? And I just didn't know that I should be looking for these things. And then once I kind of started that journey from moving from deficit to strength-based and moving to more of a collaborative model, then I started seeing certain words within that, the IEP goals, different, like even just the goals themselves on what we were working on, really then brought to light kind of that ableist language that I was using, and how that then kind of trickles into our practice. So I put the Communication Bill of Rights on here because we're talking about also AAC as an assistive technology. And it's a really important piece. I encourage you to take a look at that. We're not going to dive into all of that tonight, but I think it's important to have those Bill of Rights printed. I would print them out, have them in my classroom. Each of my students had their own little folder. We called them their Bibles. I would have it printed in there. When I did workshops and trainings with my paraeducators, I made sure that we went through these Bill of Rights and these communication Bill of Rights to make sure that we were all on that same page. We really looked at what presuming that potential and competence meant. We really looked at the different practices we were doing and how that may have been, or how we could change that away from an ableist or from that deficit model, right? So it's just having these conversations, and they can be hard. They can be hard to have with yourself, and they can be hard to have with others. And so just I think just having some honest conversations, having some training, so when we know better, we do better. Those type of things are really, I think, are a great starting place for you while you're moving from and changing from that deficit model to more of a strength-based model. Okay, so we have, we're talking about assistive technology as an AAC, and so I added this language here. There's a lot of words on this page, so this is for you to take a look at later. But what I want to dive into is really understanding that what assistive technology and how it must be made available, and what the devices and services, right? Because when we're talking about assistive technology, we can't just put it in a child's lap. Here is an AAC device, and then magically they're supposed to know how to use it. Clearly, that is not the case, right? So we need to have some services put into place on what that looks like. So we're going to take a look at some of these facts and myths. And actually, Setsi is doing I think it's 6 or 7 part series that we're working through these myths and facts, which this document that came out last year in January, so it's a year old, from the Department of Education, has done a really nice job at taking these myths. And I've been in special education since the early 90s and have been doing assistive technology for just about the same amount of time. And these myths we have been fighting against. I don't know if that's the right word, but have been really railing against as long as I can remember, and still have to discuss these as even now, even with myself and my own reading disability, and having to dispel these myths for so many people. But there's quite a few of them. We're only going to take a look at a few tonight and how they impact what we're looking at as far as IEP goals and writing strength-based IEP. So we know that let's see here. I have some red highlighted letters or words that seem to be very important, so that we need to make sure that that things are customized when we're looking at assistive technology that required by students in order to make adequate progress and making sure that they can access FAPE. This sentence down below, or this partial sentence phrase down below that I have written, is something that I tend to add in, well, I add it in every single IEP that I use when there's assistive technology involved, right? So that assistive technology provides access so that the student can make progress toward their curriculum and IEP goals. So it's a really, I end up using that phrase, making progress toward their curriculum, their general education curriculum, and their IEP goals throughout the IEP. We'll take a look at that. So first, before we dive into all that, we're going to take a look at these myths. So assistive technology should only be considered at some IEP meetings. Assistive technology services do not have to be considered. Well, I kind of gave that one away earlier. AT and AAC evaluation must be conducted prior to providing AT devices and services to a child with a disability. And AT doesn't need to be considered with transition students from Part C to Part B transition. So that's from that early birth to 3 to 3 to 5 transition. So these, and I'm giving it away, these are all myths. And so we're going to take a look at those facts. So what are the facts? Well, the fact is that AT teams must consider assistive technology at every IEP meeting. It's on the consideration page. It's usually the first one that's right there. Have you considered assistive technology? And this is really important, a starting piece when we're working with students who need assistive technology, and even for those that we're considering, right? And we'll, there's lots of consideration activities that I have built in the next few pages that can help you on that journey. But when you're working with a student that uses AAC, this is for sure something that you are writing within that consideration. So whether they currently have an AAC device, whether that's high tech, low tech, or mid tech or low tech, what devices they're using. Maybe you're looking at an evaluation on a device and you're looking at the features that you're going to be taking a look at. All of those things can be written and should be written into that consideration page and consideration section. There's never going to be a time where too much information is bad, right? We want to write these IEPs so that they kind of pass that sniff test, right? That it can go to anybody and they can take that and they know exactly what that student needs, exactly what assistive technology is being considered or is being used. So that for me is like the beginning of this IEP journey as we go in. It's the first thing people read. It should be the first thing where you have that very detailed. I love to put in, like I said, the features that are really important for that student when it comes to any assistive technology, but especially when it comes to AAC. So very, very important. We also know that AT services must be considered, and I spoke about that earlier. We can't just hand a child a piece of assistive technology, including an AAC device or even speech to text, and just magically know that they're going to be able to, know how to use it. And then, then we wonder like, oh my, like, oh, it doesn't work. Well, that's not on our student. That's on us to be able to make sure that we have those services that are embedded within this IEP. And of course, you're not going to like just start writing them into the IEP. You're going to have a nice conversation with your LEA rep, right? With your district representative, and about what the needs of the student are and what are the things the IEP team is going to be recommending. Very, very important. No one likes to be surprised with the tools that are going to have a cost to them, right? So those conversations need to be happening. Here's one that I find really interesting. Number 4 is that an assistive technology or an AAC evaluation, that it can be conducted, right? It can be conducted and included, but they're not required. So in the area of consideration, if the team decides like, hey, we're going to be doing this assessment on looking at this high-tech device for this student, but we're going to be doing that over the course of this IEP, or we're going to be doing it over the course of the next 3 months, right? You can do that. It doesn't have to be a formal assistive technology evaluation in order to write assistive technology and AAC into the IEP, right? Because you need to consider assistive technology, and if that includes AAC in the IEP, right? So this can be kind of confusing, and I've had admin that are confused by this as well. But so I just want to put it out there. You don't have to have a formal assistive technology evaluation in order to write that into the IEP. It cannot be a barrier for a student to get assistive technology or AAC. It can happen, those formal evaluations can happen, but that doesn't restrict the IEP from having those AT or AAC pieces put in. So, and let's see here, AT must be considered with transition, yes. And so this has been one that I find interesting that, for quite a long time, we really didn't see a lot of assistive technology. We really didn't see a lot of AAC in the birth to 3 programs. And now that we are understanding and knowing better about starting AAC as early as possible. There are no prerequisites to using AAC. The only prerequisite is breathing. These devices and services and tools are being used earlier and earlier, which is so great. And so they also then need to have that consideration while they're being transitioned into early childhood, but then also really even into transition on the other area, on the other spectrum, when they're going into that 18 to 21 transition. So we can't forget about our older learners. Okay, so here we go. So when we're talking about strength-based IEPs, and let's see here. We'll get into this. So we want to really consider our learners' strengths, their talents, the capabilities, their interests, and that really happens with looking at, I have a couple of these family-centered approaches of making maps, of making an action plan, and really involving the parents and making the family and guardians into that process, right? Really understanding, especially if it's a new student and you haven't worked with that student, really understanding their strengths and talents and interests is going to be really important. Having a really good understanding of what the parents, guardians of the family are really wanting to work towards and have their students work on over the course of that IEP is really important. So I have a student here. Let's see here. Am I going to have time? Yeah. So I have a student here. If you have a student in mind, that's great. I'm sure we all do. We have that one student that we wish we could put a little bit more into their IEPs or collaborate a little bit more with their IEP. But if you're not sure, I have one that I can share, and this is my friend Callie. Callie has Rett syndrome. She's non-speaking, and right here we are looking at, we're trialing a high-tech eye gaze device with her. And so I just wanted to show you her, and then if you want in the chat, if you could see any, if you wanted to share any strengths that you see, any talents, any interests, any things that you're seeing that we could start with just from this little clip, and I get it's small, that we could start when we're looking at building a strength-based IEP, right? It's also like looking at and starting at where the student is at. Where is she at? And then instead of starting where we want her to be years from now, we really need to start at where is our student at? What are their strengths? What are their talents? What are their interests? So here's Callie.
Big one or a little one for Emerald City? What square are you going to choose to put on next?
Little.
Little. That was a great choice.
So Callie really, it's so interesting in how she really focuses, and you can't really see it in this video, but really makes sure, like when she looks at you and she has your attention, like there's so much communication that's happening. So I'm just gonna pull up the chat and see if anybody had anything in there. So when I look at this, what I see is she has lots of movement and she likes to move. I think that when, if anybody's ever been to like Karen Kangas, one of her conferences at Closing the Gap or at other conference venues, she talks about this, when we're interested and when we're ready to learn, we have this movement forward, right? And so allowing her to have that movement that is natural to her and works for her and her body is really important. I think that, we have an activity that the whole classroom is doing. We're building the Emerald City, and so we were doing some math, a big and little, and she had to choose which square to put on. And that we gave her a choice and, of the different that she gets to choose. And right now it's errorless, right? So it doesn't really matter which one she chooses because we're starting with where she's at. She's never used eye gaze before. So we want to make this as fun and interactive and enjoyable and communicative as possible. So I have here, let's go into that. So as we're thinking about IEPs, and I have this checklist, and we'll also touch back on this a little later, but creating this checklist for the IEP itself. And so we talked about at the beginning, like building that team and also having conversations with parents and with family members. And I think that as we're going through and before we jump into this IEP of gaining and getting all of that information is really important. So I've created this template, and you can take it and change it, and you have access to this. Because IEPs, we know that they can be frustrating, but they can also be a really great time for celebration, right? They should be a time when we're looking at their old IEP goals, that we're saying, like, look at the gains that they have made, and here's where here's where they are, their present level of performance, and here's where we want to see them go, and we want that next step, right? The one thing that we should never, ever, ever, ever do is have the same goal from year to year to year to year. This just shouldn't be. So if our students aren't making progress towards a goal that we have set, then there's something that is wrong with the goal, right? There's something that we need to go back in and we need to change. Is the goal not, is the goal not attainable? Is it too hard? Did we start where they were not at, right? Do we need to put in, different types of levels of prompting so that we can slowly get them to where we want them to be as far as measurement of that goal. So lots of areas that you can take and go back and look at. We may keep the same. We want to work on the same, roughly the same areas of skills, but maybe what we need to do is change what that looks like and how we're getting there. So, I tend to go off on tangents, sorry. So before this IEP meeting, and if you don't have a really clear idea, I also ask parents, like we ask them in the IEP meetings, like, what are your child's strengths? And I have found that if I can prep my parents to know that we're gonna really have this strength-based approach and we're gonna work from where our students' interests and strengths are, and I want them to come to the table with their strengths, it gives them time to think about that, right? So I want them to come prepared of what their strengths are, what their interests, what their talents. And yes, we're here for an IEP because we know our students need some support in order to make gains and make progress towards, right, their educational environment. And so we want to also know those concerns. We want to keep it observational. We want to make sure that this doesn't get personal, right? Because these can be hard. These can be hard conversations. We definitely want that parent input, and it's just really important to make sure that our parents have a space to be able to be heard and to have that team to form that, right? And that doesn't happen without trust. And so giving that space. So it is, for what I like to do is prep this, have this information ahead of time so that, and have the conversation with the IEP team members. And yes, as a special education teacher, I know that means that you're talking to the OT, the PT, the speech, the vision, O&M, like you're talking with everyone, and that is a lot, right? And I'll show you, we used a Google document in order to be able to do that, to be able to start writing some of these things down. So when people had time, they could go in and add their piece to it, and then having conversations with the parents. One of the other pieces that and we'll go through this just now, is I like to send a draft of that IEP to the parents. It gives them time to read and process the ideas that we have. Again, it's a draft. I have draft written all over it. These IEP goals and everything that's in there can change during that IEP meeting. Nothing is set in stone because that IEP is a living, breathing document, right? And should be moving towards and how the student needs it to move. So it provides them time to discuss those important issues rather than reading an IEP. And I used to do that. I used to read the IEP from front to back, and we would go off and then we would have 2 to 3 hour meetings. Everybody can read this ahead of time, and we can go and hit the highlights, right? We don't have to read it all piece by piece. We're all IEP team members, including family. And so that means we all have the responsibility to take a look and to understand what that is. And when we come back together, then we can really talk about and celebrate those items. So here is an agenda. I think that really just helps. Here is a note taker. This was like, when I found this out, I just about died. So this to me was like such a big tip. The LEA rep who's assigned, I have them write directly into the prior written notice of all the notes for the team meeting and the IEP meeting, because these meetings, there's lots of people there, and that has been a huge workload reducer. So especially for that special education teacher who needs to write all the notes up, and that can take a lot of time. So take a look through this. I think that it can be very helpful. Adapt, adjust, all those things. So we're going to go and get into, we'll come back to this, which is I have a format for safety net, present level of performance, to help you make sure you have that strong process. So we're going to get back. Oh, our time is flying. Okay, let's go back. Let's see here. Okay, so here, to me, this was a really big issue. Oh, and I have a spelling here. Um, you want to pick those big issues and wrap those goals around it and work together, right? So when we're working with, and specifically speaking about AAC, and looking at those competencies and communication functions, and we want to know what is the big issue and what can we work together. So OT and speech and me, we all need to have a written expression goal and writing goal. What does that look like, right? What is the big issue that we can work together? So, okay. Ashane, you have a question. Do we have a question in the chat?
Yes, someone asked, how do we access the templates?
They should be once you, if they don't have access to the presentation, I can put those templates into the chat after, but they should all be linked within the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much.
Sure. So, okay, so when we're working with AAC, I found that I kept coming back to these competencies and the communication functions when we were looking at those written expression goals, when we're looking at reading goals, when we're looking at math goals, when you're looking at your social and adaptive goals, that we kept coming back to that communication was our biggest issue. And so how can we do this wrap around, strength-based, meet where the child is, and collaborate to come up with the IEP goals that we're all working on? And then also making sure, like, who is in charge of, grabbing the data, which we were all in charge of grabbing that data, and making sure we took that data. Then who is in charge of writing up the notes for that, or writing up when it was time to, do at the end of the year or before the IEP ended. So who was presenting that information? So what we did is I utilized, and you all have this. I'm not going to make a copy because I've already done that. So yeah, right here it is. So we created this collaboration and present performance framework so that we knew what the current goal was. This was really, really helpful then when we went to go write the IEP, because we knew what the current goal was, we knew what the current data was, and then we had a space where everybody could put in suggestions, okay, if this is our main areas, really is that communication, we are, moving towards, let's say for Callie, she was going from being able to use eye gaze in 4 quadrants and knowing the letters of her name to moving to a 5-quadrant low-tech eye gaze board. And so how are we going to incorporate reading, writing, math, social, emotional, adaptive into that, right? How is OT going to be working on writing skills and access? And how is speech going to be working on reading, and how could they support math? So it gave us this opportunity to write and have these suggested goals within each area. And then when we were writing these, we could take this and put them into the present level performance, and then write those goals. So this was one of the areas I showed this earlier. So I have found this, I really found that when we had each goal area and each present level of performance look very similar as far as the structure, then nobody had to go around waiting or trying to figure out and sift through what it was they were trying to find, like what information, right? It was just very there. It was right there. So we had, unfortunately, our adverse impact statement, which was required. And yep, it stinks, but we tried to make it positive, right? So using words like difficult rather than they can't. And then we added specific information of exactly what they're doing. So when it comes to AT and AAC, you can write, this is the spot to write it in the present level of performance, right? The exact thing that they're doing. So if they're using a specific AAC device, if they're using a specific piece of technology, a specific app, this is where you can put that in, right? Because this is what they're doing. This is the information. This isn't anything that you're recommending or saying that the next district they go to would need to use that. This is what is like, they are using these tools. They are using this. And here's the data that shows at what and how they're using it. So then I always write areas of strength, right? And how they're moving forward. Then back, we had their current goal and we had how the data that we put it in there. We put then again, what they're doing, their present level, what they can do and what progress has been made. And then we make suggestions, right? I write suggested goal and then we can tweak that, write the goal. What is that data? Where is it coming from, right? They have to go towards something. Where are they setting right now for that data? So we have some examples here for you guys that you can take a look at of what that might be as you're going through and writing that present level. And this would be who I showed you for Callie, who has Rett syndrome and uses iCase. So you can take a look at that. I've found that collaboration piece to be really helpful. So when we're looking at, we've talked a few pieces already. We've talked about the special education, the special factors and consideration page. We've talked about that present level of educational performance, right? And so then that leads right into our goals and writing those goals. Which then leads us into those program supports and the supplementary aids and services. So you can see that they're all of these three really big sections really come into forming that assistive technology in the IEP or putting AAC in the IEP. So when you're doing, it should be listed and set and stated in the special factors and considerations, in the present level of performance, in the goal area. When given her AAC, when given her 5-quadrant eye gaze device, Callie well, right? And moving towards those goals. And I have examples of those for you as well. And then what are those program supports, right? So what is the SDI? What are the type of things that needs to be written in there for services? And then what supports those? And then what are the supplementary aids and services that are going to support that? So when you have a high-tech device, we want to make sure that we always have a backup system, that we have the low-tech device. What does that look like? How are we adding that in? And where do we put that? And these areas are a great space for that. I had mentioned that I had some AT considerations. I have lots of information here. We have the quiet checklist, the SETC flowchart, the PACER flowchart. We have the SET consideration as well, and to use in your school. So we have quite a few, lots of resources. Clearly tonight we don't have time. We could do a whole class on just AT and AAC considerations, but really again, I see that is the starting point when you're writing these into the IEP. And this is just an example of looking at that AT consideration. So we talked a little bit about present level of performance and then writing the strengths. This is where you get to be in finding words like successful, right? Thinking about those strength-based and positive-based words. So I write in here, that the things that she had a pod book, participating, that it was modeled by her communication partners. Callie requires modeling throughout the day. So I'm putting all of that in the information here, right? And that's going to include writing activities, right? So this one is just based on the writing goal. There's quite a bit of this that I would pull and put into each area. So for reading, writing, math, adaptive, and social emotional. So that this would be something I would copy and paste and put into each one, because it's so important for everyone who's working on these goals to be able to access. So, and have that like clear understanding of where she is. I would also put in areas like this that, she requires a 10 to 30 seconds of response time when asked a question, and re-asking the question before this critical time will reset her, right? So I've also even put like here, wait time is an evidence-based practice and supports her in her accessing and making progress towards her IEP, her GE and IEP goals. I had mentioned in the beginning that I write that a lot, and I do. I put that in as many sections as I can, as I can get it in, because it's so important. So what are we seeing? We're seeing what she uses in her goal, positive language, the assistive technology, she's using the AAC. We're seeing how she uses it, what she needs in order for a response, and then even having, talking about evidence-based practices and putting that in and having the evidence for why you're putting in what it is. And then having this data, she's able to do these things and she's able to indicate. So it's really, we could, back 20 years ago, I would have written this much differently. I would have used words like, she can't, communicate with her mouth. She can't indicate anything. She can't tell us. She needs help with this, right? All on the student. Instead, now saying, hey, our student is being successful. We need to, it's the problem with the environment. And so we need to make sure that we are writing for that environment and for Callie and her being successful and that being positive, and us working on those environmental pieces. Okay, so here I have, example of using AAC for a writing goal. So, we want to still use these SMART goals. Back in the beginning, I had a video from Shelley Moore that talks about getting rid of SMART goals, and I absolutely love it, and she smashes it. So I would definitely suggest going and taking a look at that video. We didn't have time to do it tonight. But really looking at like, how can we create like a more of a qualitative, goal, really looking at that qualitative, but yet still have that quantitative data, right? We still have to take data. And so how can we add those? We have goal banks to help you write goals. I would use these often. Now we have AI, and being able to use AI and different AI subscriptions to be able to do that. Just please remember, do not put any identifiable information when you're using AI. Yes. Asha.
There's another question asking, what was the name of the video that you just previously talked about?
Oh, let me finish up and we'll go back and I'll show it. I have it listed right in the beginning. So it's from Shelley Moore. She does 5 minutes more with Shelley Moore, and it's about SMART goals and smashing SMART goals. But we'll go back. Okay, so we're gonna get through this probably pretty quickly. I wish we had like a whole day to talk about some of this stuff. Like we could just really dive in. So, so here's an example of like writing, the AAC into the communication goal. Now, understand they can get kind of long. Could I parse this out? I think I could. Would I write this differently now than I did a few years ago? Absolutely. So it would be interesting. I would, I've thought about going back and taking the pieces that I feel that are really important, and which I've done, which is the highlighted pieces. And I understand like having requests, describe, gain attention, using greetings, showing off, making contextually appropriate comments, like all of those could be in their own individual, IEP goal, but we're not going to do that, right? This was to give a breadth of activities for her to be able to participate in. So recognizing that this is really long and we want to make sure that we can pick out what it is that the student is going to be doing right away. So could we go back and redo this? I think we could, and I think that we could parse this down a little bit. But it does give you an idea of just the complexity that our students with AAC and the information they need for this goal to be measurable requires. Okay, so programming services. So here we have an example of her related service. Here's an example of the supplementary aids and services, program modifications and supports, different things that now we're bringing in that AAC and assistive technology into all of these pieces. And then obviously within her accommodations, they would be listed there as well. Okay, well, we have this present level performance template. I showed you that. And oops, I'm just going to say thank you, everyone. That was a whirlwind and so much to get, and I appreciate your time. I want to make sure that we have a few minutes to chat, and then I also will take us back to, let me see, I have it actually queued up. So it's right here. I'm going to put it in full screen. So it's Shelley Moore, See You Later Smart Goals. So it's about 5 minutes. It's 6 minutes and 33 seconds is the IEP, or is this video. And I think that it's really interesting. I'm just going to go here and just press pause. So she talks about SMART goals as being strength-based, meaningful, authentic, responsive. Let's see if I can get the T. Nope. Nope. Oh my goodness. Well, we'll have to watch it. You'll have to watch it. I can't remember what the T was. But I really like that idea of looking at those SMART goals as being that, I'm just going to try to get back so I can show you where it is at. Right, here we go. Reframing SMART goals has the YouTube link and YouTube video link to this one, to Shelley Moore. So reframing those SMART goals so that they are triangulated. So strength-based, meaningful, authentic, responsive, and triangulated. So I encourage you to go and take a look and watch her. She's hilarious. I think that whenever I can, I go and grab one of her videos and show it. I'm going to just turn that off. I also really love to show that and utilize those videos for training as well. I think that can be really powerful.